The morning sun was just breaking over the Rocky Mountains when Jake Morrison heard the strange humming sound in the sky. He stopped cutting firewood and looked up to see something that made no sense. Dark shapes moved across the blue sky like storm clouds, but they had edges too sharp and moved too fast to be natural. Jake had been a Marine for 8 years before becoming a wilderness guide, and his instincts told him this was trouble. Jake was leading a group of 12 people on a week-long camping trip in the Colorado mountains. They had hiked deep into the wilderness to get away from phones and computers and city noise. Now Jake wished they were closer to civilization as he watched more dark shapes appear in the sky. The humming sound grew louder and seemed to come from everywhere at once. The camping group was eating breakfast around the fire when the first explosions began. They were far away but loud enough to shake the ground under their feet. Frank Miller, a retired teacher, dropped his coffee cup and stared at the distant flashes of light on the horizon. His wife Helen grabbed his arm and asked what was happening. Jake told everyone to stay calm but pack up camp immediately. Casey Williams, a 17-year-old girl on the trip with her uncle, pointed at the sky and screamed. One of the dark shapes was moving directly over their camp. It was huge and black and made no sound, except for that deep humming. Jake had never seen anything like it. The thing looked like it was made of metal but had no wings or engines that he could see. It just floated in the air like a massive stone. Richard Stone, a businessman from Denver who had joined the trip to escape stress, started talking rapidly about getting back to the city. He said his company needed him and this was probably just military exercises. Jake knew better. Military exercises did not make the ground shake or fill the sky with impossible flying machines. Something was very wrong. The group packed their gear in 20 minutes. Jake led them away from the main trail toward a series of caves he knew about. As they hiked, more explosions echoed across the mountains. Some were closer now. Jake could see smoke rising from the direction of Denver. The dark shapes in the sky were everywhere, moving in formation like flocks of mechanical birds. They reached the cave system as the first radio broadcasts began. Jake had a small emergency radio in his pack. The voices on the radio sounded scared and confused. Reports came in from around the world about massive ships appearing over every major city. The ships were attacking military bases and government buildings, and cities were already under occupation. The radio said the attackers were not human. They came from space in ships that could destroy entire city blocks with single shots. The weapons were beyond anything Earth had ever seen. World leaders were calling for immediate surrender to prevent total destruction. Most major governments had already fallen silent. Jake turned off the radio and looked at his group. They were scared and looking to him for answers he did not have. Frank was holding Helen close while she cried quietly. Casey sat on a rock with her knees pulled up to her chest. Richard paced back and forth talking about his family in the city. The others just stared at Jake and waited. The cave was deep and well hidden. Jake had discovered it years ago during a solo hiking trip. It had multiple chambers and a small underground stream for water. They could stay here for weeks if needed. Jake told the group they would wait and see what happened. Maybe the attacks would stop. Maybe help would come. Maybe this was all a bad dream. As night fell, the explosions grew more distant but never stopped completely. The humming sound in the sky continued all night. Jake took first watch at the cave entrance and stared up at the stars. Some of the stars were moving in ways that stars should not move. He realized those were not stars at all but more ships waiting in space. Jake had fought in 2 wars overseas and thought he understood what war looked like. This was different. This was not a war between countries or armies. This was something hunting his entire species. The enemy had technology that made human weapons look like stone tools. They had numbers that blocked out the sky. They had struck everywhere at once with perfect coordination. By morning, the radio broadcasts had mostly stopped. The few voices, still transmitting, spoke about surrender and cooperation with the new rulers of Earth. They said resistance was pointless and would only lead to more destruction. They said the aliens were reasonable and would allow humans to live if they followed orders and caused no trouble. Jake listened to these broadcasts and felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. He had never been good at following orders from people who tried to rule him through fear. He was not about to start now, even if those people came from another world. The aliens had made one mistake in their perfect invasion plan. They had left Jake Morrison alive and free in the mountains, with nothing left to lose. 3 days passed in the cave before Jake decided they needed more supplies. The group had enough food for maybe a week if they were careful. But winter was coming and they would need warmer clothes and better shelter. Jake knew the aliens were setting up camps in the valleys below. But he also knew the mountain trails better than anyone. The radio broadcasts had changed. Now they talked about processing centers where humans would be relocated for their own safety. The alien voices spoke perfect English but with strange pauses between words. They promised food and shelter to anyone who reported to the centers peacefully. They warned that humans found outside the designated areas would be considered hostile. Jake told his group about his plan to scout the nearest town for supplies. Richard argued they should just walk down to the processing center and surrender. He said fighting impossible odds was stupid and would get them all killed. Frank agreed and said his wife needed medicine they could not get in the mountains. Even Casey seemed ready to give up. Helen Miller was the one who surprised everyone. The retired teacher looked Jake in the eye and told him she would rather die free in the mountains than live as a prisoner in some alien camp. She said her grandfather had fought in World War II and never stopped talking about the importance of resistance against tyranny. She would stay with Jake no matter what he decided to do. The group split up that morning. Richard led 6 people down the mountain toward the processing center in the valley. Frank and Helen stayed with Jake, along with Casey and 2 others named Pete and Linda. Jake felt bad watching the others leave, but knew he could not force anyone to fight who did not want to. Jake waited until dark before leaving the cave. He moved through the forest like his old Marine training had taught him, stopping often to listen and watch. The town of Cedar Falls was only 5 miles away, but the journey took him 3 hours. He wanted to see what the aliens looked like before they saw him. The town was completely different. Strange lights floated in the air without making any sound. Buildings had been marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Most of the houses were empty, but Jake could see movement around the old school building. That was where they had set up their base. Jake crawled closer through the trees until he could see the aliens clearly. They were taller than humans and wore armor that seemed to be made of living metal. The armor moved and shifted like liquid but looked harder than steel. Their faces were hidden behind masks that glowed with soft blue light. They carried weapons that looked like long tubes with crystal ends. 3 aliens were patrolling the street near the hardware store. Jake watched them for an hour to learn their patterns. They moved in formation and communicated through hand signals. Their movements were efficient but predictable. They clearly did not expect trouble from the local humans. Jake decided to test their reactions. He threw a rock at a car window down the street. The sound of breaking glass made all 3 aliens turn and move toward the noise. They spread out and advanced carefully but did not seem particularly worried. Jake realized they thought they were chasing a scared civilian. The first alien reached the broken car just as Jake dropped from a tree branch above. Jake had a hunting knife and used it before the alien could raise its weapon. The blade bounced off the armor like hitting concrete. The alien spun around and grabbed Jake by the throat with strength that felt like a machine. Jake pulled the emergency flare from his belt and fired it directly into the alien's face mask. The bright light and chemical smoke made the creature stumble backward. Jake rolled away and ran toward the hardware store as the other 2 aliens started shooting. Their weapons made beams of purple light that cut through trees like paper. Jake reached the store and smashed through the back window. He grabbed a crowbar and a hammer from the tool section. The aliens followed him inside, and Jake used the crowbar to knock over shelves and create obstacles. The aliens were stronger and faster, but Jake knew the building layout better. The second alien cornered Jake in the paint section. Jake threw paint cans at its head until one cracked its face mask. Strange green liquid leaked out, and the alien made a sound like steam escaping from a pipe. Jake hit it with the hammer until the mask broke completely and the alien fell down. The third alien was smarter and waited for Jake at the front door. When Jake tried to leave, purple light burned across his shoulder and knocked him to the ground. The alien approached slowly and said something in a language that sounded like metal grinding against stone. Then it spoke in English. The alien said humans were supposed to surrender when defeated. It said resistance after official conquest was against galactic law. It seemed genuinely confused about why Jake was still fighting. Jake looked up at the alien and smiled through the pain in his burned shoulder. Jake told the alien that humans had different ideas about when a fight was really over. He said some things were more important than staying alive. The alien tilted its head like it was trying to understand a joke. Jake used that moment of confusion to grab the broken paint can and throw the remaining paint at the alien's weapon. The paint gummed up the crystal end of the weapon, and Jake tackled the alien. While it was distracted, they fought hand to hand in the destroyed store. The alien was stronger, but Jake was more desperate. Jake finally won by using the crowbar to damage the alien's armor joints until it could not move properly. Jake left the 3 aliens tied up. in the store basement and took their weapons. He did not know how to use the alien guns, but figured he could learn. More importantly, he had learned something about his enemies. They were used to easy victories and quick surrenders. They had never fought anyone who refused to quit even when losing. Jake made it back to the cave before dawn with a bag full of supplies and 3 alien weapons. He told his group what he had learned. The aliens were powerful but not unstoppable. They could be hurt and confused and defeated if someone was willing to pay the price. Jake was willing to pay that price, and he hoped others would be too. Jake spent 2 days figuring out how the alien weapons worked. The crystal ends lit up when he touched certain spots on the metal tubes. The purple beams could cut through rock but only lasted a few seconds before the weapon needed to recharge. Jake practiced in the deep parts of the cave where the light would not be seen from outside. On the 3rd day, alien search teams came looking for their missing patrol. Jake watched them through binoculars as they searched the town and surrounding forest. There were dozens of them now, moving in organized groups with flying machines, providing support from above. They were taking the disappearance of their soldiers seriously. The aliens had also brought something new. Jake saw a creature that looked different from the armored soldiers. This one was smaller and wore robes instead of armor. It carried a device that beeped and flashed as it moved around the town. Jake realized it was some kind of tracker trying to follow his trail from the hardware store. Jake knew they would find the cave eventually if he waited. He decided to capture one of the aliens and learn more about his enemies. The robed creature seemed important and was less heavily armed than the soldiers. Jake planned an ambush near the old bridge where the search teams had to cross the river. Jake positioned himself under the bridge with one of the alien weapons. When the robed creature crossed above him with 2 soldier escorts, Jake cut through the bridge supports with the purple beam. The bridge collapsed and threw all 3 aliens into the shallow water below. The 2 soldiers recovered quickly and started shooting at Jake's position. Jake used the bridge wreckage as cover and fired back with their own weapons. The purple beams lit up the area like lightning. One soldier took a direct hit and fell motionless. The other soldier called for backup on a device that made clicking sounds. The robed alien tried to run, but Jake tackled it before it could reach the riverbank. Up close, Jake could see it was definitely not human. The creature had 4 arms and skin that looked like gray leather. Its eyes were large and completely black. When Jake pulled off its hood, the alien made sounds like a bird being strangled. Jake dragged the alien to a backup cave he had prepared for emergencies. He tied it up with climbing rope and waited for it to calm down. The alien kept making those bird sounds and trying to bite him with teeth that were too sharp and too numerous. Jake stayed out of range and waited. After an hour, the alien started speaking English. Its voice was high and scratchy like fingernails on glass. It said its name was Crix and it was a data specialist, not a warrior. It said Jake had violated 17 different galactic laws by attacking a research team. It demanded to be released immediately. Jake laughed and asked what galactic laws said about invading planets and enslaving entire species. Crix looked confused and said the conquest of Earth was completely legal under Imperial Code. It said humans had been evaluated and classified as a primitive species suitable for integration into the Empire. Resistance after official conquest was considered a mental disorder. Crix explained that the Empire had conquered over 200 worlds using the same methods. Initial bombardment destroyed military capability, followed by psychological warfare. To break civilian morale, most species surrendered within days once they understood the futility of resistance. The few that continued fighting were considered defective and usually destroyed. Jake asked why humans were different. Crix said that was what it had been sent to investigate. Normal species calculated odds and made logical decisions about survival. Humans seemed to fight even when fighting guaranteed death. This behavior made no sense to the Empire's behavioral models. Jake tried to explain human concepts like freedom and dignity to the alien. Crix listened carefully but clearly did not understand. It kept asking what practical benefit humans gained from choosing death over slavery. When Jake said some things were more important than survival, Crix asked him to quantify the value of abstract concepts. The conversation went in circles for hours. Crix was intelligent but could not grasp why anyone would fight a war they could. Not when Jake began to understand that the aliens saw war as a mathematical problem with only logical solutions. They had never encountered a species that fought for emotional or philosophical reasons. Jake learned that the Empire was vast and ancient. They had perfected conquest through overwhelming force followed by efficient administration. Rebellions were rare and always brief because resistance was simply impractical. The Empire offered food, shelter, and safety in exchange for obedience. Most species considered this a fair trade. Crix told Jake that Earth's governments had already signed surrender documents. The war was officially over, and continuing to fight made Jake a criminal by galactic standards. The Empire would eventually hunt down every resistance group and execute them as examples to prevent future uprisings. Jake asked Crix what would happen if the Empire could never stop the resistance. What if humans kept fighting forever regardless of casualties? Crix said that was impossible because no species was stupid enough to commit racial suicide over abstract principles. Jake smiled and told Crix it was about to learn something new about humans. Over the next few days, Jake used Crix to learn about alien technology and military tactics. The data specialist was cooperative because it genuinely wanted to understand human psychology. It seemed to view Jake as a fascinating specimen rather than an enemy. Jake discovered that the aliens had weaknesses. Their armor was strong but had joint vulnerabilities. Their weapons were powerful but limited by energy supplies. Most importantly, their strategy depended on quick psychological victories. They were not prepared for long-term guerrilla warfare. Crix became increasingly disturbed as it learned more about human history. Jake told it about wars that lasted for decades, about people who chose death rather than surrender, about entire populations that preferred extinction to slavery. Crix kept insisting that such behavior was illogical and self-destructive. Jake agreed that human behavior was often illogical. He said that was exactly what made humans dangerous. The Empire's whole system was based on logical decision-making and predictable responses. Humans specialized in being unpredictable and making decisions that defied logic. By the end of the week, Crix was sending reports to the Empire warning about the human anomaly. It recommended immediate withdrawal from Earth because the cost of occupation would eventually exceed any possible benefit. The reports were initially dismissed as the ramblings of a damaged data specialist. Jake eventually released Crix with a message for the Empire. He told the alien to inform its superiors that humans would never stop fighting. Every generation would produce new resistance fighters who valued freedom more than life. The Empire could kill every human on Earth, but it could never make them surrender. Crix left carrying Jake's message and a new understanding of human nature. The data specialist had come to Earth expecting to study another conquered species. Instead, it discovered something that challenged everything the Empire believed about intelligent life and the nature of warfare itself. Jake used everything he learned from Crix to plan bigger attacks. The alien weapons were powered by small crystal batteries that could be recharged using their own equipment. Jake raided alien supply convoys to steal more weapons and power sources. Each successful attack made the next one easier because he understood their technology better. The first major raid happened at dawn near Highway 70. Jake had learned that supply convoys traveled the same routes every day at the same times. The aliens valued efficiency over security because they had never faced organized resistance. Jake positioned himself on a cliff overlooking the road with 3 captured weapons. The convoy consisted of 2 hovering vehicles that looked like metal eggs with blue lights underneath. Jake waited until they were directly below him before opening fire. The purple beams cut through the first vehicle's engines, and it crashed into the mountainside. The second vehicle tried to escape, but Jake had damaged its steering system. Jake found the crashed vehicles full of supplies meant for the processing centers. There were food packages designed for human consumption, medical equipment, and construction materials. Most interesting were the communication devices that let him listen to alien radio traffic. Jake realized the Empire was having supply problems. The radio chatter revealed that resistance groups were active in other parts of Colorado and across the country. Small teams of humans were attacking alien patrols and supply lines everywhere. The Empire had expected a brief cleanup operation, but instead faced an endless series of small wars that were draining their resources. Jake began coordinating with other resistance groups using the captured communication equipment. He learned that a former Army sergeant named Danny Walsh was leading fighters in the Denver area. A park ranger called Betty Lopez had organized mountain communities in Utah. Dozens of other leaders were emerging across the country. The pattern was always the same. Someone refused to surrender and started fighting back. Their example inspired others to resist. The resistance grew from individuals to small groups to organized networks. The Empire found itself fighting not one rebellion, but hundreds of separate conflicts that they could not predict or control. Jake's group grew as word spread about his successes. People who had hidden in the mountains came to join him. Some were former military like Jake, but others were teachers, mechanics, farmers, and students. What they shared was a refusal to accept alien rule and a willingness to fight against impossible odds. Helen Miller became Jake's second in command, despite being over 60 years old. She had a talent for organizing people and supplies that reminded Jake of his best sergeants. Casey Williams learned to use alien weapons faster than anyone and became the group's expert on their technology. Even Pete and Linda, who had never fired a gun before the invasion, became effective fighters. The aliens responded to the growing resistance by sending hunter-killer teams specifically designed to eliminate rebel leaders. These teams were different. From regular patrols, they wore heavier armor, carried more powerful weapons, and seemed to understand human tactics better. Jake realized the Empire was adapting to human resistance methods. The first hunter team tracked Jake's group to their cave hideout. Jake had posted sentries, but the aliens used some kind of invisibility technology to get past them. The attack came at midnight when most of the group was sleeping. Only Jake's marine instincts saved them from being wiped out completely. Woke up to the sound of energy weapons firing inside the cave. Purple light illuminated the rock walls as the aliens systematically searched each chamber. Jake grabbed his weapons and moved through passages he knew better than anyone. The aliens had superior technology, but Jake had home field advantage. The battle lasted 3 hours and moved through the entire cave system. Jake used guerrilla tactics to separate the hunter team and attack them individually. He set traps using their own explosives and used the cave's acoustics to confuse their communications. By dawn, 5 aliens were dead and Jake's group had escaped. To a backup location, the escape came at a cost. 2 of Jake's people were killed and several others were badly wounded. Worse, the aliens now knew exactly where the resistance was hiding and how they operated. Jake realized they would need to completely change their methods to survive. Jake decided to take the fight directly to the Empire's command structure, using intelligence gathered from radio intercepts. He learned that the regional commander was based in a fortress built inside Colorado Springs. The facility was heavily defended, but Jake believed a small team could infiltrate it and gather valuable intelligence. The mission required 6 volunteers willing to risk almost certain death. Jake expected to go alone, but Helen immediately volunteered, followed by Casey and 3 others. They spent a week planning the assault and gathering equipment. Jake knew this might be their last mission together. The fortress was surrounded by energy barriers and guarded by dozens of soldiers. Jake's team approached through storm drains that the aliens had not thought to secure. They moved through the underground tunnels for hours before reaching the facility's basement levels. Inside the fortress, Jake discovered something that changed his understanding of the entire war. The aliens had detailed files on human psychology and military history. They had studied every major conflict humans had ever fought, and were trying to develop new strategies to defeat the resistance. What shocked Jake most was a report from the Empire's high command. The document revealed that resistance movements had appeared on every world the Empire had conquered, but none had lasted more than a few months. Human resistance was unique because it was growing stronger over time instead of weakening. The Empire was genuinely confused about how to handle this situation. Jake copied as much data as he could before alien security forces discovered the intrusion. The team had to fight their way out through heavily defended corridors. Casey was wounded, but they all made it back to the tunnels alive. The intelligence they gathered was worth the risk. The stolen files revealed the Empire's greatest weakness. They were a bureaucratic organization that relied on precedent and established procedures. Human resistance was completely outside their experience, and they had no protocols for dealing with it. Every response they tried only made the problem worse. Jake used this knowledge to design psychological warfare campaigns targeting alien morale. He left messages for Empire forces explaining that humans would never stop fighting. He described historical examples of resistance movements that lasted for generations. He made sure every alien on Earth understood they were trapped in an endless war they could not win. The psychological campaign worked better than Jake expected. Radio intercepts revealed growing unrest among Empire forces. Many aliens were requesting transfers off Earth. Some were openly questioning the wisdom of continuing the occupation. The Empire's perfect military machine was developing cracks that grew larger every day. Commander Vextara herself began studying human resistance methods and was disturbed by what she found. The Empire had conquered worlds with more advanced technology and larger populations, but none had produced anything like the human resistance movement. Humans seemed to view defeat as just the beginning of the real fight. Jake received word that resistance groups worldwide were using his psychological warfare techniques. The message was spreading that humans could not be conquered because they refused to accept conquest. The Empire faced a choice between committing massive resources to endless occupation or finding some other solution to the human problem. 6 months after the invasion began, the Empire faced a problem they had never encountered before. Earth was supposed to be a minor conquest that required minimal resources for occupation. Instead, it had become a massive drain on Imperial forces that showed no signs of improvement. Human resistance was spreading faster than the Empire could contain it. Commander Vexera reviewed reports from across the planet with growing frustration. Every day brought news of new attacks on Imperial facilities. Supply convoys were being destroyed at an increasing rate. Recruitment centers were bombed by humans willing to die in suicide attacks. Most disturbing of all, resistance was spreading to other worlds. The Mars colonies had begun their own uprising after receiving transmissions from Earth resistance groups. The lunar mining facilities had gone silent after workers destroyed critical equipment. Even the space stations orbiting Earth were reporting sabotage attempts by human personnel who had seemed completely cooperative just weeks earlier. Jake Morrison's name appeared in intelligence reports more frequently than any other resistance leader. The Empire had designated him as Priority Target 1 and assigned their best hunter teams to eliminate him. So far, every attempt had failed. Jake seemed to anticipate their moves and always stayed one step ahead of capture. Jake had learned to use the Empire's own technology against them. His group now operated from mobile camps that could be broken down and moved within hours. They used captured communication equipment to monitor Imperial communications and stolen vehicles to travel quickly across the mountains. Most importantly, they had developed a network of safe houses and supply caches that made them nearly impossible to track. The resistance had also evolved tactically. Jake no longer relied on direct confrontation with Imperial forces. Instead, he focused on psychological warfare and infrastructure attacks that maximized damage while minimizing risk. A single attack on a power station could disrupt Imperial operations across an entire region. Helen Miller had proven surprisingly good at intelligence gathering. She organized a network of civilian informants who provided information about Imperial movements and weaknesses. Many of these informants were people who had initially cooperated with the occupation but had become disillusioned with alien rule. Casey Williams had become an expert at sabotage and demolitions. She could build explosives from common materials and had developed techniques for disabling Imperial equipment without triggering their security systems. Her youth allowed her to move through occupied areas without attracting as much attention as the adult fighters. The psychological impact of the resistance was spreading beyond Earth. Other conquered species were hearing about human defiance and beginning to question their own acceptance of Imperial rule. For the first time in centuries, the Empire faced a possibility of widespread rebellion across multiple worlds. Imperial High Command demanded an explanation for the failure to pacify Earth. Commander Vexthera found herself in the impossible position of trying to explain human psychology to beings who had never encountered anything like it. The concept of fighting without hope of victory was literally incomprehensible to Imperial thinking. The Empire tried new tactics to break human resistance. They increased security around all facilities and began using predictive algorithms to anticipate resistance attacks. They offered rewards for information about rebel leaders and threatened harsh punishment for anyone caught supporting the resistance. Nothing worked. The Empire also attempted to negotiate with human leaders, but discovered that humans had no central authority that could speak for the entire species. Unlike other conquered worlds, Earth had no single government or leader who could order the resistance to stop. Every human seemed to consider themselves authorized to make their own decision about whether to fight or surrender. Commander Vexthera realized that the Empire's entire approach to conquest was based on assumptions that did not apply to humans. Imperial doctrine assumed that intelligent species would make rational decisions about survival. Humans consistently chose death over slavery, which violated every Imperial model of intelligent behavior. The economic cost of occupying Earth was becoming unsustainable. The Empire had expected to extract valuable resources and labor from the conquered planet. Instead, they were pouring resources into an endless security operation that produced no return on investment. Every Imperial soldier tied up fighting human resistance was one less soldier available for profitable conquests elsewhere. Jake learned about the Empire's dilemma through intercepted communications and decided to make the situation worse. He began a campaign specifically designed to increase the cost of occupation beyond what the Empire could afford. Every attack was planned to cause maximum disruption with minimum risk to human fighters. The resistance started targeting Imperial supply chains rather than just local facilities. Coordinated attacks on transportation networks paralyzed the movement of troops and equipment across entire continents. The Empire found itself unable to respond quickly to resistance activities because their forces could not get where they needed to go. Jake also initiated a propaganda campaign aimed directly at Imperial forces. Using captured broadcast equipment, he transmitted messages explaining human history and philosophy to alien soldiers. He wanted every Imperial warrior to understand that they were fighting an enemy that would never surrender no matter how many battles they lost. The psychological warfare campaign had unexpected results. Many Imperial soldiers began requesting transfers off Earth, claiming that extended exposure to human resistance was affecting their mental health. Some aliens had nervous breakdowns after realizing they might spend their entire careers fighting an enemy that could not be defeated through conventional means. Commander Vexera faced increasing pressure from Imperial High Command to find a solution to the human problem. The Empire had invested too much in the conquest of Earth to simply withdraw, but continuing the occupation was bleeding resources that were needed elsewhere. The situation had become a strategic nightmare with no apparent solution. The commander decided to study human history in detail to understand what made them different from other species. What she discovered terrified her. Humans had a documented pattern of fighting hopeless wars for abstract concepts like freedom and dignity. They had a cultural tradition of martyrdom that made death preferable to surrender. Most disturbing was the realization that human resistance tended to grow stronger over time rather than weaker. Historical examples showed that oppression often increased human determination to fight rather than breaking their will to resist. The Empire's standard tactics were actually making the problem worse instead of solving it. Commander Vexera began to understand that the Empire had made a fundamental error in targeting Earth for conquest. They had assumed humans were just another primitive species that would accept Imperial rule once they understood the futility of resistance. Instead, they had encountered something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that became more dangerous in defeat than in victory. The commander made a decision that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. She requested permission to open direct negotiations with the human resistance leadership. The Empire needed to find some way to end the occupation of Earth before it destroyed their entire military structure. The only question was whether humans would be willing to negotiate or if they would continue fighting until every last one of them was dead. The message came through on a frequency Jake had never heard before. Commander Vexthara herself was requesting a meeting with the leader of the human resistance. The transmission was broadcast on every communication channel the Empire controlled, making it clear this was not a trap but a genuine attempt at negotiation. Jake discussed the proposal with his core team. Helen argued it was obviously a trap designed to eliminate the resistance leadership. Casey wanted to ignore the message completely and continue fighting. Others worried that refusing to meet might provoke the Empire into more brutal tactics. Jake ultimately decided to accept the meeting, but on his own terms. Jake chose the ruins of Denver as the meeting location. The city had been heavily damaged in the initial invasion, and most of the population had been relocated to processing centers. The empty streets and destroyed buildings would provide good cover for Jake's people while making it difficult for the Empire to stage an ambush. The meeting was set for noon at the steps of the old state capitol building. Jake arrived with a small team hidden in positions around the area. Commander Vexthera came with only 2 guards, a surprising show of good faith from someone representing an empire that controlled thousands of worlds. Commander Vexthera was different from the other aliens Jake had encountered. She was taller and wore robes instead of armor. Her face was visible behind a transparent mask that allowed her to breathe Earth's atmosphere. When she spoke, her voice was calm and measured, without the mechanical quality of the soldiers' translators. The commander began by acknowledging that the Empire had underestimated human resistance. She said Imperial strategists had studied every major conflict in human history and were impressed by humanity's willingness to fight against overwhelming odds. She admitted that standard Imperial conquest methods were not working on Earth. Jake listened carefully but remained suspicious. He had learned not to trust anything the Empire said without verification. When Commander Vexthara asked what it would take for humans to stop fighting, Jake gave her an answer that clearly surprised her. He said humans would stop fighting when every Imperial soldier left Earth and never came back. Commander Vextara explained that complete withdrawal was impossible because the Empire had invested too many resources in the conquest of Earth, offered to negotiate better conditions for human civilians in exchange for an end to resistance activities. She promised that humans would be allowed to govern themselves under Imperial oversight. Jake rejected the offer immediately. He said humans had no interest in being governed by aliens under any conditions. He explained that the resistance was not fighting for better treatment but for complete independence. The Empire could offer all the concessions it wanted, but humans would never accept alien rule voluntarily. The conversation revealed the fundamental incompatibility between human and Imperial worldviews. Commander Vexera could not understand why humans would choose continued warfare over peaceful surrender with guaranteed survival. Jake could not understand why the Empire expected gratitude for offering slavery with better conditions. Jake used the meeting to deliver a message directly to the Imperial leadership. He explained that human resistance would continue for generations regardless of casualties. He said every human child would be taught to fight the Empire until Earth was free or every human was dead. There would be no compromise and no surrender. Commander Vexera asked Jake to explain the practical benefit humans gained from choosing death over Imperial rule. Jake told her about human concepts like dignity, freedom, and self-determination. He said these ideas were more important to humans than physical survival. The commander listened but clearly struggled to understand. Jake shared examples from human history to illustrate his point. He told her about people who had died fighting tyranny throughout human civilization. He explained that resistance to oppression was a fundamental part of human nature that could not be eliminated through force or negotiation. The Empire had made an enemy of the entire human species. The meeting was interrupted by reports of new resistance activities across the globe. While Jake and Commander Vexera talked, coordinated attacks had struck Imperial facilities on 6 continents. The timing was not coincidental. Jake had planned the attacks to demonstrate that human resistance operated independently of any central leadership. Commander Vexthara realized that eliminating Jake would not end the resistance because he was not really in control of it. Human resistance was a spontaneous expression of their species' refusal to accept domination. Killing resistance leaders only created martyrs who inspired more people to fight. The Empire faced an enemy that grew stronger through defeat. The commander received an urgent communication during the meeting. Human resistance had spread to the Proxima Centauri colonies and the mining operations in the asteroid belt. Humans throughout the solar system were coordinating their rebellion using the same tactics that had proven successful on Earth. The Empire's human problem was becoming galactic in scope. Jake watched Commander Vextara process this information and saw something he had never seen in an alien before. She looked afraid. For the first time, an Imperial leader was beginning to understand the true scope of what they had unleashed by invading Earth. Humans were not just defending their homeworld but fighting for the freedom of their entire species. Commander Vexera made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. She told Jake that the Empire was prepared to withdraw completely from human space if resistance activities stopped immediately. The offer included Earth, or human colonies, and a guarantee that the Empire would never attempt to conquer human territory again. Jake was skeptical of the offer but agreed to communicate it to other resistance leaders. He warned that any Imperial forces remaining in human space would be considered invaders subject to attack. He also demanded the release of all humans held in processing centers and the return of any human property seized during the invasion. The negotiations continued for several days as Commander Vexthara consulted with Imperial High Command. The Empire was divided between those who wanted to commit more resources to crushing human resistance, and those who recognized that the cost of occupation had become unsustainable. The commander argued successfully for complete withdrawal. Final agreement was simple. The Empire would withdraw all forces from human space within 30 days. Humans would cease attacks on Imperial forces during the withdrawal period. Both sides would establish neutral zones to prevent future conflicts. Most importantly, the Empire would classify human space as permanently off-limits to Imperial expansion. Jake watched the Imperial evacuation with mixed emotions. He was proud that humans had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history by forcing an empire to abandon a conquered world, but he also knew that the cost had been enormous and that humanity would need to remain vigilant against future threats. Commander Vextara left Earth with a new understanding of human nature. She had learned that some species valued abstract principles more than survival and would fight indefinitely for concepts that could not be quantified or understood through imperial logic. The Empire had encountered its first truly unconquerable enemy. The Empire classified human space as a restricted zone and warned other species about the dangerous anomaly of human psychology. They had expected to conquer a primitive world and instead discovered a principle they could not defeat. Humans had proven that while they could be killed, they could never be conquered as long as they carried the unshakable belief that freedom was worth any sacrifice. Jake returned to his mountains with the knowledge that humanity had won something more valuable than victory in a single war. They had established their reputation as a species that would never accept domination. By others, the galaxy had learned that humans were not just another primitive species to be catalogued and controlled, but something genuinely unique and permanently dangerous to anyone who tried to rule them.